blurred boundaries. That is what I've discovered after reading all these tell-all royal books over the last 6 months. I've detected a pattern. And the pattern is that when there is blurred boundaries between a staff member and a member of the royal family, it leads to all sorts of problems. It leads to feelings of betrayal and distrust and angst and hurt and inevitably a book. So I wanted to give you an example of those blurred boundaries, and with quite an unexpected example. Now, when we talk about Paul Burrell, don't switch off, bear with me. When you talk about Paul Burrell, there are really big emotions in the comments. Either people absolutely loathe the guy, they think he overstepped the mark, they think he got too big for his boots and, basically didn't know his place and was betrayed the royal family. And then there's the other side where people think, well, actually, he got the short end of the stick and he was betrayed and he was stitched up with the charges against him and he was treated rather shabbily by the Spencers and, so there's the other argument as well. Well, when it comes to blurred boundaries, I can see that it wasn't actually Paul Burrell that overstepped the mark. I can see that it wasn't Paul Burrell that was too familiar with Princess Diana. It was more the other way around. So I'm going to give you a few examples from Paul Burrell's book, A Royal Duty. And when I was looking at it from this angle, because I really did detect that blurred boundaries was the cause of a lot of trouble in a lot of books, I realised that a lot of the time it did actually come from members of the royal family. It was them that were too familiar, too intimate, they blurred the boundary, and then the inevitable fallout after that. Now, luckily, Prince William and Catherine are running their household in a much more modern way. They're employing professionals. They're employing people for set tasks. They're employing people for sort of contracted project time. And when the project is complete or finished that stage, they then bring in someone fresh. Prince William is not relying on that old Eton schoolboy network thing that maybe went for generations before him. He's actually just employing the best people for the job. And inevitably there will be mistakes made with hirings. They're always in the course of a business career. You make boo-boos. But overall, I think it's going to stand them in good stead. And I don't think there's going to be quite as many tell-all books about their administrative arm or their part of their royal journey. So Paul Burrell, what do I mean about blurred boundaries? Well, he had to make a decision whether he was going to go with Princess Diana or the then Prince Charles when they separated. And he'd had a little bit of a falling out with the then Prince Charles. He was operating as his butler at Highgrove. And Princess Diana was off somewhere else and would ring and check up on the movements of the then Prince Charles. And Paul Burrell would feel obliged to lie. Then he would feel bad because he would have to face up to Princess Diana and look her in the eye. And it was just a nightmare. And so basically he was having one side trying to find out what was going on and he had the other side more or less expecting him to lie. So it was very, very awkward. Now, Princess Diana made it very, very clear that she wanted Paul Burrell and by, extension, Maria and the boys to move up to Kensington Palace. But before their accommodation was ready, Paul Burrell had to join her at Kensington Palace and Maria and the boys were still staying in their cottage back at Highgrove. The only difference was they were no longer allowed up at the big house because they were on Princess Diana's team from that point. And so their boys, who used to run up to the big house to play with Harry and William if they were there, were no longer allowed to go up there. And Maria, who had been a housekeeper at Highgrove, was no longer up there, couldn't go and talk to her friends, basically, on the outer. So I imagine it would have just been awful. But going on to the blurred boundaries part now, and we can see in a little passage that I'm going to read out to you that Paul Burrell actually found it quite difficult to leave sort of what he'd learnt at Buckingham Palace and what he had exercised at Highgrove, this sort of professional demeanour. He found it very challenging to maintain those standards at Kensington Palace with Princess Diana. Now, one of the examples was Paul Burrell's insistence on calling her Your Royal Highness. And he could still do that because she hadn't lost her HRH yet. They were only separated. She didn't lose that until they actually divorced. So he was quite proper to say Your Royal Highness. And every morning he would go into her drawing room area and say, Good morning, Your Royal Highness. Anyway, I'll read it to you in his words. My insistence on tradition and using Your Royal Highness clearly irked her. Paul, please don't do that. There's only the two of us in this room. There's really no need, she said. But I insisted on keeping to protocol. It was the only time when I didn't listen to the boss. If she wanted to invite me across the professional line to share her world, that was fine. But by addressing her as Your Royal Highness, I showed respect and defined my role. So at the beginning of that journey of Kensington Palace, he was trying to maintain standards. He was trying to delineate that he was the butler and she was the princess, and he respected her and treated her accordingly. So I just can see, reading between the lines in his book, when I looked back at it with these blurred boundary eyes, I could see repeatedly he was trying to put them back into their respective roles. He really went out of his way to try and keep everything proper and above board. But she was the one with the oversharing. She was the one looking for solace and friendship. She was the one sharing too many intimate details. And I think over time, she chipped away his professional resolve. And I think that's why the poor man was so emotionally destroyed when she died, because I really think he loved her. Now, the other thing was astounding was I sort of saw that he didn't really have set work hours. And so that made it very awkward when Maria and the boys came up and settled in, because he would be, starting at 7:30 in the morning and finishing at 11 at night. There was no clear formal work hours. He was basically on call whenever Princess Diana wanted him. Now, in the book, he's not complaining about it, but it's just evident in the way he's telling the story. It's glaringly obvious. And I really do feel for the guy. I really do. Here's an example. So everyone is not there. Harry and William are at boarding school. Anyway, I'll tell you in his words because he tells it so well. So she's home alone at night. The chef's left a meal. I willed in her 2-course evening meal that with William and Harry at boarding school, she preferred not to be left alone. Stay a while, she said, more times than I can remember. I stood, leaned against an upholstered chair, and talked about her day, my day, the week ahead, what he had said, what she had said, the plot lines in Coronation Street, which is UK sort of soapy serials, or Brookside. Now listen to this. These nighttime chats might be brief or extend into a chat that lost all track of time. Often the ITN news at 10 o'clock was a signal for bed. So she's sitting there eating her dinner. He's standing, leaning against an upholstered chair. So from 7 to 7:30 till like 10 at night, often these chats would go on and on and on. Meanwhile, his family, his boys, are off in the barracks sort of apartment that they've got at Kensington Palace. And he's locking up and turning off all the lights and finally getting home to his home at 11 o'clock at night, whereupon his family are all in bed, asleep. And this example after example of this inconsiderate sort of approach of Princess Diana. If they got unexpected time off or an afternoon off, instead of sending him home to Maria and the boys, she'd send the chef home, but she would say to Paul, would you like to watch a movie? And he, being the kind man he was, would say, oh, yes, okay, that'd be great. Well, what's he supposed to say? That's the thing with blurred boundaries. You can't very well say, oh, no, actually, I'd rather just go home, thank you. You can't, because then you probably get the frozen cold shoulder and disapproval and disappointment the next day. We've all been through all that. So, yes, I really did feel sorry for the man after going back and reading this detail in the book. And I think that maybe he got an unfair rap when people are saying that he overstepped the mark, he was too familiar. I actually think that the blame actually lied with the person in the superior position at the time, which was Princess Diana. Let me know what you think, and if you have ever experienced blurred boundaries of your own, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye.